9 years after the birth of Christ, in the dark forests of Germania, 3 Roman legions marched to their doom. 20,000 of Rome's finest soldiers, the most disciplined, best-equipped military force the ancient world had ever seen, walked into the trees and never came out. Their bodies were left to rot where they fell. Their golden eagle standards, the sacred soul of each legion, were ripped from dying hands and paraded as trophies by men Rome called barbarians. The legion numbers, the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, were so utterly destroyed, so completely annihilated, that Rome never used those numbers again. For 2,000 years, those numbers have remained retired in shame. This is the story of the Teutoburg Forest ambush. This is how Germania stopped Rome's expansion forever. This is how one man who learned to fight like a Roman used that knowledge to destroy Rome. And this is how a forest became a graveyard so vast that when recovery expeditions returned 6 years later, they found thousands of skeletons still lying in formation, bones picked clean by wolves, skulls nailed to trees as warnings. The soldiers who found them wept and vomited. Many refused to march further. They had discovered what happens when civilization meets nature on nature's terms. The man responsible for this catastrophe stood on both sides of the battle line. His Roman name was Arminius. His Germanic name was Hermann. He was 25 years old, stood 6 feet tall in an era when most men barely reached 5'6", and spoke flawless Latin with an aristocratic accent that would have been at home in the Roman Senate. He wore Roman armor, commanded Roman auxiliary troops, and had spent years fighting for Rome on the empire's frontiers. Roman generals trusted him completely. Why wouldn't they? He was one of them. He had Roman citizenship. He had a Roman education. He had proven his loyalty in combat dozens of times. But Arminius was playing a role. Everything he learned from Rome, military tactics, supply logistics, command structure, the precise weaknesses in legionary formations, he memorized not to serve Rome, but to destroy it. Because Arminius was born a prince of the Cherushi tribe, his father was a Germanic chieftain. His people had been conquered, occupied, taxed, and humiliated by Roman legions, and Arminius, educated in Roman military camps, watching Roman officers treat his people like animals, had spent 10 years planning revenge. The target of that revenge was marching directly into Arminius's trap, and he had no idea he was bait. Publius Quinctilius Varus was 55 years old, governor of Germania, and everything Arminius hated about Rome condensed into one man. Varus hadn't earned his position through military genius or battlefield heroics. He had married into Emperor Augustus's family. He was the emperor's grandnephew by marriage, which in Rome meant you could fail upward indefinitely as long as you had the right relatives. His previous posting had been Syria, where he governed Hellenized Greek cities with paved roads, theatres, and bathhouses. Syria was civilized. Germania was not. But Varus didn't seem to understand the difference. He treated Germania like it was already pacified. He held court, settling disputes between Germanic tribes using Roman law. He collected taxes from people who had no concept of Roman taxation. He travelled with an enormous baggage train, wagons full of furniture, wine, luxuries, even his wife and children, because in his mind, Germania was safe. The barbarians had been conquered. They just didn't know it yet. All that remained was the administrative work of turning them into proper Romans. Arminius fed this delusion carefully. He appeared at Varus's side constantly, translating, advising, vouching for the loyalty of Germanic tribes. When Varus asked if a route was safe, Arminius said yes. When Varus worried about rebellion, Arminius reassured him. And when reports arrived in September of the year 9, Anno Domini, that a minor Germanic revolt had broken out in the northern territories, Arminius had the perfect solution: take the legions on a shortcut through the Teutoburg forest. It would cut days off the march. Arminius knew the route personally. He would guide them. Varus agreed immediately. Why wouldn't he? Arminius had never given him reason to doubt. A few junior Roman officers expressed concern. The forest route was dangerous. The tribes in that region were unpredictable. Marching through dense forest with a massive baggage train was tactically insane. But Varus dismissed them. Arminius was Roman. He vouched for the route. They would march. 3 legions began moving into the forest: Legio 17, Legio 18, and Legio 19. Each legion consisted of roughly 5,000 heavy infantry, plus auxiliary troops, cavalry, engineers, medical staff, and support personnel. Add in the civilians: wives, children, slaves, merchants following the army, and the total column numbered over 20,000 people. Stretched out in marching order through forest trails, the column extended for nearly 15 miles. Varus rode in the center with the baggage train. He couldn't see the front of his army or the rear. He was essentially blind. The moment the Roman column entered the Teutoburg forest, everything that made Roman legions unstoppable became a liability. Roman military doctrine was built on geometric perfection. Legions fought in tight formations, the testudo, or tortoise formation, where soldiers locked shields overhead and on all sides, creating an armored box that could advance into arrow storms without breaking. Roman cavalry charged in organized wedges. Roman artillery, ballistae and onagers, required flat ground to deploy. Every advantage Rome possessed required open terrain where formations could maneuver, where cavalry could charge, where discipline and training could be brought to bear. The Teutoburg forest had none of that. Trees grew so dense you couldn't see 50 feet in any direction. The ground was a nightmare of roots, fallen logs, sinkholes, and streams that had to be forded. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of decomposing leaves that hid the terrain underneath. There were no roads, no trails wide enough for wagons, no clearings where formations could deploy. The Roman column was forced to march single file in many places, sometimes only 4 men wide, meaning the legion, normally 120 men wide in battle formation, was compressed into a miles-long snake that couldn't fight, couldn't maneuver, couldn't even see what was happening 100 yards away. And then it started raining. September in Germania is cold and wet. Storm clouds rolled in, and rain turned the forest floor into a muddy swamp. Roman soldiers wore larica segmentata, segmented plate armor made of iron bands strapped over a heavy wool tunic. Each soldier carried a scutum shield made of layered wood and leather, weighing 22 pounds. Add in a gladius sword, 2 pila javelins, a helmet, a pack with rations, tools, and personal items, and each legionary carried between 60 and 80 pounds of equipment. In open terrain, this was manageable. In forest mud, it was torture. Soldiers sank to their ankles with every step. Wagons broke axles on hidden roots and rocks. The column slowed to a crawl, and every minute they spent struggling through the mud, they went deeper into the killing ground. Because Arminius hadn't just chosen any forest. He had chosen this specific stretch of terrain for a reason. For weeks, his Germanic warriors had been preparing the battlefield. They had built hidden earthworks, low walls and ditches disguised by branches and leaves that would funnel the Roman column into narrow defiles where they couldn't spread out. they had felled trees across the path, forcing Romans to climb over or go around, breaking up the column even further. They had built wooden platforms in the trees where archers could shoot down on the Romans without being seen. This wasn't a random ambush. It was a meticulously planned killing field, and the Romans were walking directly into it. On the second day of the march, the attack began. It started with arrows. Germanic warriors, hidden in the trees, began shooting into the Roman column. Not a mass volley that would reveal their positions, but a steady, methodical harassment. An arrow would punch through a legionary's exposed neck. Another would hit a horse, causing it to panic and crash into other soldiers. Romans raised their shields, but arrows came from every direction. They tried to form defensive formations, but the terrain made it impossible. The forest was killing them. Then came the revelation that broke morale entirely. Germanic auxiliary troops, the soldiers Arminius commanded, the men who had been marching with the Romans, eating with them, fighting alongside them for years, suddenly turned on their supposed allies. These auxiliaries knew exactly where Roman officers were positioned. They knew which soldiers carried the legion standards. They knew the baggage train's location, and in coordinated strikes, they began killing Roman commanders, targeting centurions and tribunes, decapitating the command structure before the legions could organize a defense. Varus finally understood. Arminius had betrayed them. The shortcut was a trap. The rebellion was fake, designed to lure them into the forest. And now they were being systematically slaughtered by an enemy who knew Roman tactics better than most Romans. Varus ordered the legions to fight through to open ground, to break out of the forest and reform where Roman discipline could matter. But there was no open ground. Every direction led deeper into trees, and Arminius had warriors positioned everywhere, waiting. The massacre continued through the night. Romans tried to build a defensive camp, but the ground was too muddy for proper fortifications. They couldn't light fires. Fires would make them targets. They couldn't tend to the wounded. Medical supplies were with the baggage train, which was under constant attack. They couldn't even sleep. Germanic war parties raided the camp every hour, dragging screaming soldiers into the darkness. The Romans could hear them dying but couldn't help. By dawn, morale was shattered. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were exhausted, terrified men waiting to die. On the third day, the column tried to keep moving, but cohesion was gone. The baggage train, which included Varus's wife and children, along with hundreds of other civilian camp followers, was being overrun. Germanic warriors showed no mercy. Women and children were killed alongside soldiers. Varus watched his wife murdered. Something inside him broke. He knew this was his fault. His arrogance, his trust in Arminius, his refusal to listen to warnings. He had killed 20,000 people through sheer incompetence. The three legions fragmented into isolated pockets, each trying to survive independently. Each group still carried their legion's eagle standard, the aquila, a golden eagle mounted on a pole, considered the soul of the legion. Losing an eagle was the ultimate shame in Roman military culture. The aquilifer, the soldier who carried the eagle, was expected to die defending it. And that's exactly what happened. 3 separate last stands. 3 aquilifers surrounded by the few remaining soldiers of their legions, fighting to protect their standards while Germanic warriors closed in. One by one, the eagles fell. The aquilifer of Legio 17 tried to bury the eagle so the Germans couldn't capture it. He was speared while digging. The Germans dug it up, laughing. Varus didn't witness the final collapse. Wounded, surrounded, Knowing capture meant torture and public execution, he made the Roman choice. He fell on his sword, committing suicide rather than surrendering. His bodyguard tried to cremate his body so the Germans couldn't desecrate it, but they only partially succeeded. Germanic warriors found the remains, decapitated the corpse, and sent Varus's head to a rival Germanic king as a gift, who then sent it to Rome as a warning. Of the 20,000 people who entered the Teutoburg forest, perhaps 500 escaped. Some threw away their armor and ran, surviving by abandoning everything that marked them as Roman. Others were captured and enslaved. A few were kept as hostages for ransom. Most died in the forest over the course of 3 days of continuous slaughter. The Germanic tribes, Cherushi, Chatti, and Marsi, had united under Arminius's leadership just long enough to destroy 3 Roman legions. As soon as the Romans were gone, the tribes went back to fighting each other. Unity lasted only as long as the Roman threat. News reached Rome weeks later. Emperor Augustus was 71 years old, in declining health, and ruling an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. He had spent his entire reign expanding Roman territory, bringing civilization to barbarians, securing borders. The news from Germania shattered him. Contemporary sources report that Augustus banged his head against the palace walls, screaming, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." He never recovered psychologically. The loss haunted him until his death 5 years later. Rome's response was immediate and permanent. The empire abandoned all territory east of the Rhine River. Plans to conquer Germania were scrapped. The Rhine became a permanent border, fortified with watchtowers, legionary fortresses, and walls. Rome, which had conquered Gaul, Britain, Greece, Egypt, and Carthage, could not conquer the Germanic forests. One ambush had permanently altered Roman grand strategy. The 3 legion numbers, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were retired forever. Rome never reformed those units. The shame was too great. But Rome did send expeditions to recover the bodies and, more importantly, the eagle standards. 6 years after the battle, a Roman army under Germanicus Caesar returned to Teutoburg forest. What they found traumatized them. Thousands of skeletons lay scattered across miles of forest, still wearing rusted armor, still in the rough shape of marching formations. Skulls were nailed to trees. Bones showed evidence of torture. Shattered limbs, crushed rib cages, decapitations. The Romans found altars where Germanic priests had sacrificed Roman officers to their gods. They found mass graves. They found armor piled in ritual offerings. The forest had become a vast open-air tomb. Germanicus's soldiers spent days trying to bury the dead, but there were too many bodies. The forest was too vast. They gave up and focused on recovering the eagles. Over the course of several military campaigns spanning decades, Rome managed to recover 2 of the 3 eagles, those of the 17th and 18th legions. The eagle of the 19th legion was never found. It's possible the Germans destroyed it. It's possible it's still buried somewhere in Germany. Either way, 1 eagle remained lost forever, a permanent reminder of Rome's worst defeat. Arminius didn't get to enjoy his victory for long. He had united the Germanic tribes through the promise of plunder and revenge. But once Rome was gone, the tribes resumed their traditional rivalries. Arminius tried to establish himself as a permanent king, but Germanic tribes didn't have kings in the Roman sense. They had chieftains who led through personal charisma and success in battle. When Arminius started acting like a Roman autocrat, his own people turned on him. In the year 21, Anno Domini, 12 years after Teutoburg, Arminius was assassinated by rival Germanic nobles. He was 37 years old. Rome had sent assassination squads to kill him, but his own people got there first. He saved Germania from Rome, but couldn't save himself from Germania. The battle's legacy extends far beyond ancient history. Teutoburg Forest defined the border between the Roman and Germanic worlds. That border, the Rhine River, became a cultural fault line that persists today. Western Europe, which Rome controlled, developed Romance languages, Roman law, and Christian institutions spread by Roman infrastructure. Eastern Europe, which Rome never conquered, developed differently. The Germanic tribes that Arminius united eventually became the peoples who would invade and destroy the Western Roman Empire 4 centuries later. The Vandals, Goths, and Lombards, who sacked Rome, were descendants of the warriors who fought at Teutoburg. In a very real sense, the forest ambush planted the seeds of Rome's eventual collapse. Modern archaeology has given us a precise picture of what happened. The actual battlefield was discovered in the late 20th century near Kalkries, Germany, not far from where tradition always claimed it occurred. Excavations have uncovered thousands of artifacts: Roman coins, armor fragments, weapons, tools, even skeletal remains. One of the most haunting finds was a Roman face mask helmet, a ceremonial cavalry helmet shaped like a human face. It belonged to a young cavalryman, probably in his 20s, probably dead within hours of entering the forest. His face is frozen in iron. Anonymous, a son and brother who never came home. The Germans built a massive monument to Arminius in the 19th century, when German nationalism was creating a unified German state from dozens of smaller kingdoms. Arminius became Hermann the German, a symbol of German resistance to foreign occupation. The Nazis later perverted this symbolism, claiming Arminius as a proto-Nazi hero defending racial purity, which is a grotesque distortion of actual history. But the monument still stands, a towering statue of Arminius, holding a sword pointed west, toward France, toward Rome's descendants. Military historians study Teutoburg Forest as a perfect case study in asymmetric warfare. A technologically superior, better trained force destroyed by guerrilla tactics, superior terrain knowledge, and intelligence gathered through an embedded agent. The parallels to Vietnam, Afghanistan, and every other modern conflict where conventional armies struggle against insurgencies in difficult terrain are obvious. The lessons are timeless. Know your enemy. Never underestimate irregular forces. Terrain matters more than technology. And trust carefully. But there's a deeper lesson in Teutoburg, one that makes the battle more than just a military disaster. Varus's fatal flaw wasn't tactical stupidity. It was cultural arrogance. He believed so completely in Roman superiority that he couldn't conceive of barbarians outsmarting him. Arminius was Roman-trained, Roman-educated, wore Roman armor, spoke Latin fluently, but Varus saw only the surface. He never understood that someone could adopt Roman methods while rejecting Roman values. He never imagined that his civilization's greatest strength, its ability to assimilate and train foreigners, could become its greatest vulnerability when those foreigners used that training against Rome. The forest itself is a metaphor that haunted Rome for centuries. Romans saw themselves as bringing order to chaos, geometry to wilderness, civilization to barbarism. They built straight roads through curved landscapes, rectangular cities in irregular terrain, logical laws for illogical humans. The forest represented everything they feared: uncontrolled nature, unmapped space, darkness, literal and metaphorical. And in the Teutoburg Forest, that darkness swallowed Rome's light completely. When you visit Kalkries today, The forest is still there. It's been logged and replanted many times over 2 millennia, but it's still dense, still dark, still easy to get lost in. Tour guides tell you about the battle. They show you where archaeologists found concentrations of Roman artifacts, where they think the main killing ground was, where the Germans probably built their concealed fortifications. And if you stand quietly in the trees, you can imagine what it must have been like for those legionaries, trained since childhood to fight in open formations, suddenly blind and helpless, hearing comrades dying in the darkness, knowing there was no way out. 20,000 people entered that forest. 500 left. 3 eagles went in. None came back intact. 3 legions marched east. Their numbers were never used again. 1 battle, 3 days, changed the course of Western civilization. Rome never crossed the Rhine permanently again. Germania remained free and fractured, and every Roman soldier stationed at the Rhine frontier for the next 400 years stared into those forests, knowing what happened there, knowing that beyond the trees was a land Rome couldn't conquer. Augustus, Caesar died, knowing he had failed in Germania. His last words to his successor Tiberius reportedly included, "Do not expand the empire further. Consolidate what we have." Rome, which had conquered the known world, was told by its dying emperor to stop expanding because one forest had proven unconquerable. That is the legacy of Teutoburg Forest. Not just a battle, but a boundary. Not just a defeat, but a definition of the limits of empire. The forest remembers. Every year after heavy rains, farmers in the Calcarees region find Roman artifacts in their fields, coins, nails, pieces of armor, occasionally bones. The forest is giving back what it took, piece by piece, century by century. And with every artifact, we're reminded that beneath the myth and the monument and the military analysis is a simple, terrible truth. 20,000 people walked into the trees, and the trees kept them. The eagles never came home. The legions never reformed. The empire never forgot. Teutoburg Forest wasn't just Rome's worst military defeat. It was the moment civilization learned that nature still had places where order couldn't reach, where technology didn't matter, where the best training in the world meant nothing if you were fighting in the wrong place against people who knew that place better than you knew yourself. Rome conquered most of the known world, but one forest conquered Rome.